Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are in the world. And thank you for attending today's presentation on CFD simulations in the medical and pharmaceutical field. My name is Cyril Jacks, and along with Barzin Gaftash, who will introduce himself later on, we will be presenting this webinar. On my side, I've got a background which is mainly focused around aerodynamics and thermal CFD applied to the automotive industry. Last year, I joined Maya HTT, and this allowed me to widen my skills and knowledge to more applications and industries, such as the medical field, which will be our point of interest for today. Here is the agenda for today's presentation. I'll start by introducing Maya briefly, before presenting the volume of fluid capabilities in STAR, and a demo on how to set it up on a simple case. The core of the webinar will be presented by Barzin, and it will feature a real-world inhaler simulation using the technology introduced in our second section. The rest of the presentation will showcase other customer examples, and we'll wrap up the session with a short slide on how to get started with us, if this presentation grabbed your interest. So first, who are we? Well, MyHTT is a worldwide Siemens partner. We are passionate engineers that originally started in the space industry that are now recognized worldwide for our multiphysics simulation in almost every industry. Over the years, we developed over 30 software modules for Siemens, and we now have more than 1 million of users all around the world. We help our clients put satellites in space, design zero-emission vehicles, perform predictive engineering, and even find better ways of doing engineering. So from satellites to even write simulations, we do it all. Moving on, we'll see in the next section how to set up a volume of fluid model using STAR-CCM+. But first, I'd like you all to undertake a quick poll with us. And this poll is going to be, have you already used the CFD software? And if so, which one? So would it be Simcenter STAR-CCM+, another commercial CFD code, an open CFD code, or even an in-house code, or none of them?
So Cyril, so the results are coming in from that. Also, whilst you're answering the poll, don't forget we've got a question and answer facility on the webinar. And if you've got questions as Cyril presents or Barzin presents, feel free to add them in and we will try and answer them at the end as efficiently as we can. So some nice results. So thanks for those who voted. So we've got a nice set of results coming in from people. So I will share on the screen so you can see that we've got some STAR users, some users of different CFD codes, a good proportion of open source, and then some of you are not currently using CFD codes. So as Cyril mentioned, I think he's going to take you through sort of a quick overview of what's possible with within STAR in this area. But I guess a lot of this is applicable generally as well. So Cyril, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. Yeah, so I think the results are really interesting, and that will wrap up nicely with what we want to present today. So first, and especially for those who haven't used any CFD codes, let me put STAR into context. So Simcenter STAR-CCM+ is part of the Siemens portfolio, and it's a multiphysics software. It also sits within the broader Simcenter platform, which is complemented by 1D simulation tools such as AIMSIM, structural software such as Simcenter 3D, and other testing tools. Within this platform, STAR is focused on the CFD side of things. And if we look at medical applications, there is many things that we can model. We could do medical diagnosis, such as respiratory diseases, blood circulation simulation, catheter simulation, so in this case, we're injecting a liquid into an artery, medical devices such as a blood pump, a heart valve simulation here featuring our fluid structure interaction technology. On the right, you'll have an inhaling simulation. So in this case, we're injecting Lagrangian particles into a mouth cavity, and these particles are sticking to the walls and creating a fluid film thickness on the throat of the patient. Or we could also have tablet coating, so in this case, using the discrete element method available in STAR-CCM+. And I guess following the previous slide, the question is going to be, how can we actually use STAR to model an inhaler? Well, for this, we can use the multiphase technology, because an inhaler will feature a highly pressurized liquid being injected in an atmospheric chamber. Now, if we look at the right-hand side picture, this is the result of a super simple simulation we will set up before Barzin shows us a real-world example of an inhaler. So just to make things clear, this is not an inhaler, but this example will show you how to use the CFD fundamentals in order to build an inhaler case. Here, we're starting with water on the left chamber and air in the nozzle on the right chamber. And then due to high pressure gradients, we're forcing water through the nozzle, and the sudden change in pressure creates a cavitation. There is no heat transfer involved in this case. So in this case, we're displaying volume fraction of water in red, and there is air in blue. The vapor is displayed in the green region around the inlet of the nozzle. Why is this important? Because in a case of an inhaler, we want to know how much liquid is going through to the patient and maybe even understand the actual dosage required. We want to know where the cavitation appears and how the flow is behaving in the nozzle. So for example, how is the homogeneity of the flow looking like? And if that's not okay, if that's not matching your requirements, then we can change the spray angle, we can change the pressure of the liquid, or we can even change the nozzle shape. As mentioned, we will use the multiphase flow technology, but what exactly is that? Well, multiphase flow can be classified into two categories. You've got the dispersed flow, such as bubbles, droplets, or particles, and then you've got stratified flows, which are continuous flows with a free surface. And when we say multiphase flow, we use the term phase, and that usually refers to a thermodynamic state of matter, such as a solid, liquid, or gas. While in modeling terms, it can also refer to other characteristics, such as the densities of a liquid of different density, water and oil, for example. That can be bubbles of different sizes, and that can also be solid particles of different weight or sizes. So for example, steel particles, sand, or even rubber particles. And if we apply that to the case I just mentioned before, we're going to have three phases in our model: water, vapor, and air. And coming back to, let's say, a day-to-day application, because multiphase flow can be used on very high complex simulations, such as a reactor or multiphase pumps, multiphase flow pumps. But that's also something that's used on a day-to-day basis, like when you put on your dishwasher, for example, or even when you take a shower or when you spray paint something in your back garden. So this is something that we use all the time without actually realizing it. And how do we use that in STAR-CCM+? There is 7 multiphase models in Simcenter STAR-CCM+, and each of them have got different strength. But overall, there is two big families of multiphase models. You've got the Eulerian models, which are solving all phases as a continuous flow field going through a fixed computational grid. All conservation equations are solved for each phase individually. And then you've got the Lagrangian models, which are solved with the phases represented as discrete parcels, each of these parcels representing a statistical distribution of particles. The equations of motion are solved for each of these parcels to determine their trajectory, and plotting the position of an individual particle through time will give you the path line of this particle. So to make things a bit simpler, if I had to create an analogy, well, if I was looking at a river and I wanted to understand how the water was flowing through the river, with the Eulerian method, I'll be sitting on the bank of the river and I'll be looking at the water pass a fixed location. If I was using the Lagrangian method, I'll be sitting in a boat and I'll be drifting down the river, chasing the particles that I'm interested at. So the model we're going to use today is called VOF, so volume of fluid. And the volume of fluid method is a member of the Eulerian family of multiphase models. It solves a single set of transport equations together with volume fraction for the phases, and so can be thought of as a single phase plus volume fraction. The volume of fluid tries to capture a sharp interface between phases which are assumed to be immiscible, such as water and oil or water and air, and that can also model surface tension. When we use volume of fluid, we need to make sure that the time step is such that the CFL number normal to the free surface is less than 1. Otherwise, the interface will be diffuse and the distribution of the phases will eventually be wrong. Also, VOF does allow you to capture phase changes, such as cavitation, so that when a liquid undergoes a sudden drop in pressure and that pressure eventually becomes lower than the liquid saturation pressure, then vapor cavities appear. So saturation pressure is going to be the main parameter for this type of application. And there is many cavitation models available in STAR. The one we're going to talk about today is the full Rayleigh-Plesset model, and that will be showcased in the following demo. Just before starting this demo, I'd like to mention that when we talk about CFD, there is always 5 workflow steps. You've got the geometry preparation, you've got the meshing or the discretization of your geometry, then you've got to prepare your physics and your solver settings before preparing the post-processing, and then you've got the run. So in this example, to make it a bit shorter, we're not going to show any of the geometry and mesh setup. We're going to start straight away from a 2D mesh, and we're going to define the physics of interest, including the volume of fluid model, the definition of our free phases, make sure that the material properties are correct for these phases, and enable the cavitation model. So here we are in STAR, selecting the physics. The 2D space discretization has been selected automatically based on our geometry. We're going to select an implicit unsteady time discretization because we want to capture the unsteadiness of the flow as it passes through the nozzle. Then we'll select the multiphase and volume of fluid model, and we'll complete the physics by enabling a turbulent flow regime with the K-epsilon turbulence modeling. You can see that as we selected models, recommended submodels were selected automatically, such as the wall treatment. Once we've selected all our physics model, we can close the GUI window, expand the model folder in the simulation tree on the left-hand side in order to review and modify our physics properties. The next step is going to be to define our free phases. We can create a continuous Rayleigh phase for each of them, starting with the water. To simplify the model, we'll define it as a constant density liquid. You can see that the GUI window that appears is similar to the one used to define the physics. We can then repeat this step to create the air phase, which will be defined as a constant density gas. Again, in order to simplify our model. Every time you create a phase, default material properties are assigned to them. And our last remaining phase is the water vapor phase, and that will also be defined as a constant density gas. As you can imagine, if our case had heat transfer involved, that would of course be different. One thing that you can notice is that the default material for a liquid is water, and the one for gas is air. Therefore, we need to modify the material for the vapor phase and select water. There is a couple of ways of doing this, either going through the database or by directly searching for the material. This database is built in within STAR, but materials can be added, or a custom database can also be downloaded. As you can see, the default density is now correct for a vapor phase. Checking the material properties, you can see that for now, density and dynamic viscosity are the only variables defining the materials. Enabling the cavitation model will allow us to define the saturation pressure. To do so, we'll create a multi-phase interaction between our water and vapor phase, selecting the heavier phase first. We can then select the full Rayleigh-Plesset cavitation model. Properties for the cavitation model are available as you expand the different nodes, including surface tension. You can also make sure that your interaction is correct by checking the VOF phase interaction node and make sure that the phases assigned are the right ones. Coming back to our water phase, we can now see the saturation pressure being available, and we can modify this parameter in order to reflect our material properties. Once our physics have been defined, there is an additional step to do when we solve multiphase flow. We need to initialize the phases in space. So in this case, as I mentioned before, we've got water in the left-hand side chamber, and then air in the nozzle and the right-hand side chamber. So we will use an if equation calling the vector position in X, which is displayed here. So if we look at this equation, it reads as the following. If the vector position in X is superior or equal to this value, which is the inlet of the nozzle located here, then that will be filled. So this is going to be the equation defining the air. And we'll have the exact opposite equation defining the water, so saying that if this is below this X value, that will be filled. Then we'll set up our boundary conditions. Left-hand side and right-hand side walls will be set as pressure outlets with a phase definition, and I'll come back onto that later. The bottom wall will stay as a symmetry plane, whilst the rest of the walls will be defined as walls. And finally, we'll need to make sure that the time step and total physical time are relevant for this application. So we start off this video with the equation being defined for both phases, which we have respectively called initial distribution of water and air. The next step is to assign these equations to both phases as an initial condition. We therefore select the initial distribution of water for the water phase and the initial distribution of air for the air phase. The vapor is set to 0 as it's not present at the beginning of the simulation. That will ensure that at the start of our simulation, the left-hand side chamber is filled with water, whilst the nozzle and the right-hand side chamber are filled with air. Next, we'll define our boundary conditions. For now, they're all set to symmetry planes. The bottom wall will stay as a symmetry plane, whilst the left-hand side and right-hand side wall will be defined as pressure outlets to create the pressure gradient effect. The remaining walls will be defined as slip walls. Let's start by defining the left-hand side outlet. It is set to a high pressure so that it forces the water through the nozzle. An additional step with multiphase flow model is to specify the phases at the boundaries so that only certain phases can enter the domain through these boundaries. In this case, it's going to be water on the left-hand side. You can open the GUI window to check that the phase you selected is the right one. The right-hand side outlet stays at the atmospheric pressure to create the vacuum effect. And we also make sure that only air can enter this boundary in case there is recirculating flow happening at this boundary. Again, you can check it by opening the GUI window. Last but not least, we need to tweak our solver settings. As we're running an implicit unsteady volume of fluid model, we need to make sure that the time step is low enough so that the robustness and accuracy of the free surface are ensured. Also, we can change the total physical time in order to capture all the modeling needed for our application. Before running our case, we're going to prepare our post-processing to display the different phases. For that, we're going to use simulation histories, which allows to record the simulation. Then we'll run the case and replay our physical fields of interest, focusing on the vapor phase. So we'll start by creating a scene, which in STAR is used to display physical quantities on our geometry. We'll display the volume fraction of water, a value of 1 indicating water, and a value of 0 indicating air. And make sure that we enable the smooth field contour style before initializing the simulation. As you can see, the chambers have been filled with water in red and air in blue. The free surface is quite smeared in between the phases, but this is because our mesh is quite coarse. So this is okay for demo purposes, but that will not be sufficient for real-world cases. Next, we can add an annotation with the solution time to get a better understanding of the simulation. Now, before running the simulation, we'll create the solution history files. These files record physical quantities in regions and/or objects of interest, such as a plane section. We can say, for example, the pressure, the velocity magnitude, and the different volume fractions for our three phases, which are water, air, and vapor. These quantities can then be replayed after the run is completed. We'll make sure that we only record these quantities every 5 time step in order to keep the file size relatively small. Now we can launch the simulation and then fast forward to the end of it. Please do not consider the high residuals as this was only done for demo purposes. We can then create a recorded solution view based on the solution history. This solution view can be drag and dropped in our initial scene, and that will basically include the recording in our scene. As you can see, the solution has been updated to the first time step recorded by our history file. Just before replaying the simulation, we are going to create a second scene in order to display the volume fraction of vapor. Again, we can rename this scene and make sure that the scalar field selected is correct. So in our case, the volume fraction of vapor. And both the scenes display can be linked to ensure a proper comparison. And for that comparison, we can create a side-by-side view. And then we can drag and drop both our scenes in this view. We are now ready to replay our simulation. And you'll see that as I press the play button, as the water flows through the nozzle, cavitation occurs at the nozzle entrance as a result of the low pressure region that the sharp corner and the accelerating flow produce. Right, this concludes our simple demo setup on STAR-CCM+. I'll now let Barzin introduce himself and talk about his industrial inhaler case.
Thank you, Cyril. Would it be possible to advance to the next slide, please?
Yeah, you
oh,
should
fantastic. Sorry,
have
I've got control. Thank you very much. Yes, absolutely. Right. So hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. My name is Barzin Gaftash, and I work in Kindeva Drug Delivery. So we are a global contract development manufacturing organization in pharmaceutical industry, and we've got well-established technology platforms in microstructure, transdermal, and inhalation drug delivery. A bit of a background about myself. I received my PhD in mechanical engineering in 2016 from Loughborough University, and my work was basically in collaboration with Chiesi Pharmaceutical Company on CFD simulation of pressurized meter dose inhaler. I also worked as a postdoctoral KTP associate and later as a senior product development engineer in 3M Drug Delivery Division. And currently, I am the device development technical manager at Kindeva Drug Delivery, and my work includes developing mathematical modeling and predictive engineering tools in healthcare and life sciences. And in this presentation, I would like to share with you the outcomes of our findings in predicting the internal flow and external spray characteristics of a pMDI using computational fluid dynamic techniques. As you all know, pMDI has been the mainstay of drug delivery to the lungs for probably over 50 years. The aerosol formation by pMDIs involves fragmentation or atomization of bulk liquid stored in a space that we call it a metering chamber, and from there the liquid will be atomized into respirable droplets, which typically has the size range of 1 to 5 microns. But details of this atomization formation process have only become clearer probably during the last 5 years, and mainly through some visualization studies and laser-based measurements. And what has become clear is that the quality and basically stability of these aerosols highly depends on the details of the flow inside the expansion chamber of a pMDI. Now, in this presentation, I would like to show the results of a CFD study that carried out recently at Kindeva in collaboration with our great partners, Maya HDT and Loughborough University. And the purpose of this work is trying to see if it is possible to predict the characteristics of internal flow and external spray of a pMDI using multiphase capabilities that are available in STAR-CCM. So moving forward, we split the modeling in this work into two main parts, which are basically the internal flow and external spray sections. The purpose of the internal flow of the internal flow CFD model is to understand the precursors of liquid atomization inside a pMDI. And to do this, the first geometry domain of our model is basically the expansion chamber of a typical pMDI, which is the space formed by the valve stem and the actuator sump. We also consider the actuator orifice and the exit cone of the pMDI as well. And we discretize the computational domain by approximately 500 polyhedral elements, as you can see on the slide, and the base length scale of 50 microns was chosen after a series of trial and error to arrive at the right degree of convergence. Now the walls are taken to be smooth with good approximation, which is probably a good approximation, mainly because pMDI components are highly finished, and there is basically the limited heat transfer between the walls of the pMDI and the surrounding due to the very fast scale of velocity of this flow. Now, the other part of the simulation is basically the external spray modeling, which we also seek to predict the spray characteristics issued outside of the pMDI. Now, the CFD domain for this part of the modeling is basically a typical pMDI that is injected into the USB induction port. And again, in this simulation, the walls are assumed to be smooth and adiabatic. The mesh regions with the smaller geometric scales, as well as the near orifice region of the pMDI, are also refined to be able to capture more accurately the flow solution quantities. And we discretize the entire domain into approximately 1,500,000 hexahedral elements. Now, moving on to the physics and boundary condition. In the internal flow model, the expansion chamber is assumed to be filled with air at atmospheric condition at first. HFA 134A propellant enters into this space through the valve orifice at a mass flow rate with an instantaneously varying vapor content that we calculated this by a separate model, and we have been using this extensively before. Now the flow leaves the computational domain through the exit cone of the actuator nozzle where the pressure is taken to be atmospheric, i.e. 1 bar, and the flow in this modeling involves vapor and liquid phases, so it is necessary to use multiphase flow capability. And we have chosen volume of fluid mainly because this algorithm has the important capability to represent flash evaporation. And to be able to do this, flashing is represented by the cavitation model based on the well-known Rayleigh-Plesset equation of the bubble growth and the variation of the number of active nuclei with superheat follows the relationship of Senda, that is again widely used in automotive fuel sprays. And in order to predict the distribution of vapor and liquid phases more accurately, for these sorts of model, it is normally guided to include the gravity forces as well. Moving on, in our external spray model, we've assumed that the air is entering the pMDI at 30 liters per minute and exits the outlet of the induction port at atmospheric pressure again. Now, for this type of modeling, we use Lagrangian particle tracking to stimulate the spray dynamics. The droplets are defined as multi-component HFA ethanol mixture, and the spray source is constructed with the time-dependent velocity and mass flow rate boundary conditions, which again are calculated by a separate model. And the pMDI cloud basically undergoes a rapid evaporation with a strong heat, mass, and momentum transfer in near orifice region. And to be able to capture these strong interface phenomena, we basically use two-way couple algorithm in a STAR-CCM to be able to capture the effect of the particles on the surrounding. Now, moving on to the results of our simulation. So first we show an animation with an overview of the predictions of the CFD model, and we are going to look at the distribution of the volume fraction of liquid. So the color scale corresponds to phase volume fraction. So if I just run this animation, so we can see that straight after coming in from the metering chamber, a propellant jet is predicted to impact on the valve stem wall opposite the valve orifice. And subsequently, the liquid phase predominantly sticks to the wall. The predictions show that much of the liquid also flows downwards under gravity, but some of the liquid has also got sufficient energy to flow upwards first towards the top of the valve stem, and some of it reaches to the wall containing the valve orifice. So again, moving forward, You can see that the vapor mainly flows through the central region of the expansion chamber and it forms a vapor-rich core. And again, the force of gravity caused the liquid to drain down the walls of the expansion chamber and to make its way to the actuator sump and from there to the actuator orifice. Now, as you can see, as we are moving towards the end of this simulation, we can see the vapor-liquid mixture becomes more vapor-rich and turns into more like a homogeneous mixture. So, next step, we show a more detailed view of the mid-height in the valve stem, and to validate the trends of the model, we show a number of images that were grabbed from the literature. We note that the geometry of the actuator was not the same as it was in this model, but these results demonstrate that the trends of the model are hopefully credible. So the CFD model, right at the beginning of the actuation, predicts that the flow is characterized by the liquid wall films and the vaporous core flow. And this is also observed by the phase contrast images, as you can see on the right-hand side of the slide. Now, again, as moving forward in time, as the actuation time proceeds, the existence of the wall film becomes even more evident in CFD, as you can see also in the phase contrast images as well. So moving forward from here, towards the end of the actuation, the CFD model again predicts that the wall film almost disappears and the mixture becomes predominantly vapor-rich and homogeneous. Now, the next set of results is basically the flow in the actuator sump. Again, as we can see, the model predicts how the liquid drains down the wall of the expansion chamber and collects in the actuator sump. And you can see such phase distribution has also been observed in the phase contrast images as well. Right. So now here we show an animation of the spray dynamics inside the induction port, and the color code here is basically corresponds to velocity magnitude. We can see the spray is emitted. There we go. So as you can see, the spray is emitted with a very high velocity, and if I just can pause this. Yep, starting from the beginning. So you can see that the spray is basically emitted with a very high velocity, is something in the order of 80 meters per second, but then rapidly decelerates to values of around 30. You can also see the existence of very strong recirculation zone, and also the spray kind of skewed towards the outer wall of the vertical pipe of the induction port as well. And towards the end of the actuation, you can see that the spray basically exits the outlet region of the induction port at a very, very low velocity, is something probably below 1 meter per second as well. So the key thing here is that we basically observe a very strong recirculation zone inside, very close to the spray source, and also we can see a rapid deceleration rate of the spray as well. Now, moving forward, to gain confidence in our spray model, we compare the CFD prediction against our phase Doppler anemometry measurement of the spray. I should mention that the measurements are basically conducted on a spray injected into still air, where the CFD model is basically, as you saw, the spray injected into a confined spray with finite co-flow. However, we believe that the comparison should give us a good understanding of the order of magnitude and validity of the model. So the first figure here shows the spray velocity magnitude at various radial positions at 25 millimeter away from the spray orifice. And as you can see, there is a great agreement exists between the model predictions and our measurements. So both velocity profiles captures the Gaussian distribution very well. And as you can see, the velocity magnitude of around 30 meter per second exists around the center line of the spray. Now, the next figure shows the spray center line velocity as a function of axial distance. So as you can see, again, our CFD prediction closely follows the measured data up to 35 millimeter. And from this point onwards, we can see that the CFD model predicts basically a greater deceleration rate compared with the measurement, which is probably likely due to the wall effects that we've got in the induction port. But the agreement is actually very good when we are at the near orifice regions as well. And the final figure here is basically the comparison of the predicted and measured droplet size with respect to axial distance. So reduction of the droplet size is basically a result of the spray evaporation, mainly up to 40 millimeter. And after this point, you can see that the droplet size, both in measurements and CFD predictions, remains somewhat unchanged. And this is mainly because the HFA completely evaporates and ethanol becomes the only and also the less volatile component of the droplet. So I guess here we also have a quick poll that I'm gonna hand over to Adam. So I guess the question here is that how do you think that we basically correlated with the experiments here? And please.
Yeah, you should be able to see the question on your screen now. Thanks for voting. Just to remind you again, there's a question panel. If you've got questions you want to ask Barzin and Cyril, please post them. We will have some time at the end to answer them. All right, I'm going to close the poll now and share the results. So it looks like you got a good mark, Barzin. So 100%
That's fantastic.
Yes.
That is great. Nice one. Thank you very much, guys.
Okay, it's back on the main presentation now.
Thank you, Adam. Right. So on that fantastic results of the poll, I'm just going to wrap up and summarize. So basically, to reiterate that what we've done here, the intention of this project was basically to see if it was possible to capture the relevant characteristics of pMDI internal and external flow. And basically, the work here has shown that we could get the reasonable agreement between the predicted and measured trends. We also observed some interesting trends. For example, like we saw, like a liquid-rich zone is predicted to occur in the actuation sump, and this basically corresponds well with our experimental observation. Other key flow characteristics such as the spray velocity and droplet size predicted by CFD also showed a very good agreement with measured values such as phase Doppler anemometry data. And I think the collection of these validations activities clearly emphasizes on the applicability of CFD to enhance our product performance understanding. And we believe that this and similar modeling tools enables us to definitely get a better control of, for example, aerosol droplet size and velocity, which are the key attributes of such a medical spray. And definitely with further refinement and performing more kind of comprehensive validation exercise, we see that this type of modeling has a high potential for optimization of pMDI device geometry and also formulations on the basis of fundamental understanding, which are great use to a company like us. So with that, I'm gonna hand over to Cyril again for the rest of the items on the agenda.
Thank you, Barzin. So before we wrap up this presentation, I'd just like to show you a few other customer examples that have been using Simcenter STAR-CCM Plus successfully. And starting with Vyaire Medical. So Vyaire Medical have been looking to develop respiratory supports for patients, typically premature infants with underdeveloped lungs. And Simcenter STAR-CCM Plus has helped them to improve their design so that whilst the system provides an increased oxygenation, there is no additional energy required from the infant to take a breath. For that, they first had to use surrogated models in order to develop a CFD model that was accurate enough to replicate the patient's breathing. But once they had their model ready, they were able to improve it so that when the infant is breathing, the jet flow is directed towards their nostril. And if they demand more flow with their breath than what the system can provide, the jet will actually entrain flow from an entrainment port. And as soon as they take a breath out, the jet would be moved out of the way. And that really helped them to breathe without doing a lot of effort, which is really important for a premature infant. This example was done with Vyaire Medical again. So in this case, they've been looking at simulating respiratory masks with 2 cycles, one where the patient is inhaling, and the second one where the patient is exhaling. So you can see those on the top right corner. The challenge with respiratory mask is that you want to bring as much oxygen to the patient as possible whilst exiting the carbon dioxide in the meantime to avoid rebreathing CO2. So to gain more insight about the gas mixture and especially CO2 concentration at the end of exhalation, they ended up modifying their design and adding a sensor, and its position was determined by CFD. CFD was also used to change the position of the oxygen port in order to maximize the oxygen delivery to the patient. And here we've got another inhaler application. And so the main challenge for optimal inhaler and drug design is to understand the flow behavior in the mouth cavity, but also to understand the dosage required to reach the lung branches. And part of this design process is to understand how to vary spray angles, particle sizes, or medication composition. In this case, STAR has been used to optimize the spray angle using Lagrangian particles and the fluid film model in order to efficiently deliver the medication to the lungs. Right, just before we finish, a quick slide on how do you get started. So if this presentation has grabbed your interest and you'd like to know more about our software, we can take you through a guided evaluation. We would work with you to figure out what you need, what are your requirements, how can we integrate STAR in an optimal way depending on your CAD tool and or your other CAE softwares. And one of our biggest success is our support system, which does include a dedicated support engineer, so for example, myself in the UK or my colleagues over in Canada and the US, who can answer your questions and help you make the best out of your software and simulations. We can also provide training and consultancy services. In the end, to summarize this presentation, we've first seen how Simcenter STAR-CCM Plus can help you to simulate medical applications using built-in technologies such as the volume of fluid method. We've also seen with Barzin how accurately can STAR replicate real-world complex fluid dynamics such as the ones happening in inhalers. And last but not least, if we had to go beyond this application, and as Barzin mentioned, optimize it through CFD, what could we use? Well, we could use our fully automated optimization process called the Design Manager. This process allows you to create automated parametric studies that, if coupled with our intelligent algorithm Sherpa, will find the best design based on your inputs and outputs. So if we look at this mixing vessel here, the design is being updated by the algorithm in order to decrease the power requirements. And for that, it's changing criteria such as the number of blades, the number of mixing vessels, and the thickness or the length of the blades as well. And that is the final design that it finds out. So thank you for engaging with us during this discussion. And again, a big thank you to Barzin for co-presenting this event with us. The key point that I would want to leave with you today is how accurate STAR has been when it comes to simulating an inhaler. Thank you all for attending and listening. If you have any questions, we will now be happy to answer them.
So you can enter any questions you've got in the question panel on the webinar. Thank you again, Cyril and Barzin, for presenting that. Just to kick off the discussion in this Q&A. So, Cyril, we saw you used a generic mesh for this application. Is the sort of AMR functionality available with the VOF model?
Yes, so it is, and that's actually a really good question. So in the VOF model we did together with Barzin, we actually tried the AMR capability, which is based on which is refining the free surface, and we had some convergence issues. So, and for time constraints as well, we had to remove it. But yeah, this is definitely something that's available in STAR, and not only actually to the VOF, you also have, so AMR, sorry, stands for Adaptive Mesh Refinements, for those who wouldn't know. So it refines the mesh as the simulation go through based on certain criteria. So for the volume of fluid model, we've got one based on the free surface, and we've got also another 3, which are for the mixture multiphase, for the overset mesh, and the combustion models, so for the flame front.
Okay, thank you, Cyril. I guess maybe one for both yourself, Cyril, and Barzin. So a general thing about the trends you're seeing with the modeling tools in this part of the industry. Any comments you would, I guess maybe Barzin, if you've got any comments on that one?
Yeah, sure, I can take that. But I believe with this part of the industry, you mean, or rather, the person who asked the question means the pharmaceutical part of the industry. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what I've got. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I can take that. And well, CFD has been definitely a very useful tool for say automotive industry, for aerospace industry, so basically these sorts of engineering fields. But it's relatively only recently has got more and more attraction in the pharma industry. So if you look at different kind of companies, you can see that they're starting to use CFD more and more. And the way that I personally see it, for example, in Kindeva, the company that we are working on, we can see the growing use of CFD day by day. So I've been always given this sort of analogy, if you like. These sorts of tool like CFD, they're really like a screwdriver. So you cannot afford not to use them when it comes to an engineering, a design work, understanding of your product. So I'll definitely see that the trend is a growing trend in using CFD.
Nice one. Thank you, Barzin. And we've had a few comments of thanks, and thank you for sharing your insight that's come in on rather than sort of questions, but just general statements of thanks. So if there are no more questions, I'll just give you a few moments if you've got any other questions. We will wrap it up there. We normally send out another vote of thanks for you guys coming there. So we typically send out a post-webinar kind of survey, which is, and if you can share any feedback you've got, we'd love to hear it. And there's an option there to add for future topics of interest. And I believe also this webinar will be released as a recording, which you'll be able to access. So if there are no more questions, I think we'll call it there. Again, thank you very much, Barzin, for presenting, and Cyril, and thank you everyone for attending. And have a good evening or rest of the day wherever you are. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Barzin. Thank you, Adam. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers. Bye-bye.